Hey guys, I want to welcome you to the weekly Wednesday for the Financial Freedom newsletter, where every week, every Wednesday, we delve into something inspirational, motivational, something excerpt taken from the Financial Freedom weekly newsletter. Wherever you are, if you're listening on Spotify, on iTunes, Google, be sure to click the like, subscribe, share, comment. And without ado, let's get into the show. Welcome everybody to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom Podcast. And I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And as you know, I talk about the 4 different types of freedom: time, financial, location, health, freedom. And I'm always scouring the globe, interviewing entrepreneurs, people doing things on the cutting edge, impacting the world. So today we have a very interesting guest, Dave, and he's the host of the Business of Tech podcast. So I'm really interested in talking with entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs, this whole area of entrepreneurship. So Dave, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Christopher. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really excited, and we connected through Podmatch. And tell us more about your story, your journey, and what your company does.
Well, when I was little, I grew up, and I kind of always start this story from, I knew I wanted to be in technology since I was little. And I have a degree in computer science. So I graduated with a bachelor's in computer science. And if you'd asked college Dave while I was still a student, he would have said, oh, yeah, I'll be building products and writing code for my career. And that was where I started. I started as a developer, a QA kind of person, did consultancy, and wrote a couple of startups up and down in the late 90s. And when the last one went down in flames, I realized that it was the owners and the salespeople that still had jobs, and they laid off the tech people. And I quipped to myself, I said, well, I can run a company into the ground just as much as those numbnuts. Maybe I should give this a whirl. And I launched my first company, which was an IT services firm. We would now actually call that kind of a managed services firm. My idea was, I'm going to help small companies with their technology, and we'll take over that need and we'll work on an ongoing basis. I ran that organization for about 10 years, grew it from just myself to an organization about 1.4 million, about 14 staff at its largest. And I was like super active in the IT community. I wrote a book. I helped, I was a Microsoft MVP. I helped with peer groups. We launched those into Europe. Like, I was a CompTIA trainer. I did everything. I signed up for everything. Constant speaker on the circuit and such. I had the opportunity to sell that business, and I went and worked for a couple of software vendors actually, and helped companies like I had grow. That was my mission, is that if we helped them grow, they'd buy more software. Sold the first one to a company called AVG. We sold the second one to a company everyone now knows, SolarWinds, infamous for other reasons. I left about a week or two before they were hacked. And then my sort of third chapter of this was that I said I wanted to be a little disruptive on the content side. And I said I knew I could take all of this knowledge and I could do something in podcasting and video. And here I am 3.5 years later, and I have a media company that produces our flagship podcast, The Business of Tech.
Yeah, it's awesome. Entrepreneurship is all about pivoting and redefining and really being agile, nimble. And it's really great to see, fellow entrepreneurs. Tell us about, we'll talk a little bit about, IT, state of the market regulation, and we'll go into kind of hybrid work. But tell us, the current state of the IT services market.
I mean, it's such a crazy space. So I love this space. About 87% of it is made up of companies that do less than $10 million in revenue, which should be familiar for anybody who's in entrepreneurship, which are generally small businesses, right? Like, when I think about this, I actually use like doctors, lawyers as examples of the types of customers that we pursue. The number I always like to throw out is for every dollar of Microsoft revenue, there's $8 associated with their partners. And a good portion of that is the services, like helping you get it installed, knowing sure you know how to use it, like making sure that you're effective with it, making sure it's secured, making sure it's backed up, like all that stuff. What goes into an IT services business. That's the bit that I like to think of. It's a healthy market. It's not necessarily an explosive growth market. This is a market that likes, between sort of 10 and 20% growth each year. Most of these businesses do that kind of stuff, but it's solid services revenue and very reliable. In fact, businesses like this tend to get created in downtimes, and they flourish even more in the uptimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell us, yes, I love the IT market because it's very scalable, and you're talking about technology, and what you're talking about is a service sector. How about, products, business solutions, software, all of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's all the associated stuff that goes along with that, right? And I've been doing this long enough that when we talked about it early, we always meant the actual hardware itself, like the installing of the computers. Now, when we talk about the core technologies, we're generally talking about like your business process software, the line of business application that runs your business, the productivity suite. Like that's the stuff where the real value is right now. And most of the providers that I talk to that are really forward thinking are spending their time there. So it's made up of hardware and software and solutions that all come together to solve a particular customer's problem.
Yeah. Speak to a little bit about regulation and technology.
Well, it's kind of the Wild West, and I have to laugh, like speaking to a doctor, right? And I can actually make this a little simple. So you go through a lot of training to become a doctor. And then there's a formal process that actually recognizes at a state and regulatory level that you have those skills. Well, over on the technology side, we don't have that. Any of us can hang out our shingle and declare that we are an expert in this and allow, get your hands all the way into everybody's technology without any kind of check on that. The way that regulation is done in the space tends to be around anything that has to do with data management. So like things like PCI compliance or HIPAA compliance or some of these laws that are very much focused on the data, but not around the people. Now that's a US phenomenon. It looks a little different in Europe, in particular Europe with their GDPR and privacy laws. But here in the States, it's much more focused on the way that the data is managed, not the people that are doing it. And so oftentimes you have to be looking at the kinds of data that you're collecting and then what applicable laws applied to it based on how you're using that data. So for example, I'll make it super simple, right? I could take information about a particular human, and if it's used in a medical context, that's a different set of laws than if it's used in a financial context. But it actually could be the same piece of data. It just has two different sets of rules applied to it based on the context of how it's being used.
Yeah. And how about, for example, security, security, privacy? I know you touched a little bit upon, but how about especially, hacking and data breaches, all of that?
It's a huge space, right? And so we all like to talk about it because oftentimes the actual hacking and the security threat that's out there is very much underestimated by most business owners. I like to sort of simplify it and say you need to really think of it like a digital mafia. This is organized crime acting in countries where they have protection, where it is actually a good job. They punch in, they punch out, they're run like corporations. They go to a job. It just happens to be illegal here, but they operate in places where it is they look the other way. These are really sophisticated organizations. It's kind of funny to think about. They do press releases. They release financial statements. They have sales organizations. They have HR and benefits. You can take time off. Like they actually work in shifts. Like it's an actual organized crime. And what they're trying to do is they are systematically looking to steal data from you and find a way to have you pay to get it back. They started with we'll encrypt it and ransom it back to you. Now they've moved on to we will extort you and threaten to give this data out to others if we take it. And so that's the cyber space, and they know that the number one way they're going to be able to get in is social engineering. They're going to be able to do something to the humans that work at your business to make you do something that will get them access.
And everything is, we talk about, the mafia that you talked about in ethics and its effect on small tech companies. But real quick is that's the core thesis of Web3 is kind of everybody owns their identity and their data. I'm not sure if you can speak to that or you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, It's kind of a lot of hype. And this is by the way, we've been talking about the ownership of data and the way that it's done for a very long time. I believe that there are certain core technologies and the stuff that we talk about in Web3, like the idea of the blockchain. But I'm not one of these people that come in and say like, oh yeah, this is going to solve everything. We've been having these conversations for 20 or 30 years. What's happening now is the stakes are just higher. We've gotten to a world where everyone is much more technology enabled than they've ever been. They have access to much more powerful technologies, and it is much easier for the criminal organizations to exploit that. That's really the change in the landscape, more than this being a pure raw change in problem.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's good to get different perspectives because, I talk to a lot of creators. They say, Web3, especially, for example, they can like non-fungible tokens, they can have direct access, and it's interesting to get different takes.
Yeah, I mean it's funny because I'm way more interested in what's going on with AI right now than I am with some of the crypto and the Web3 stuff. Like it's just, I mean, that kind of proved itself that it didn't actually have a problem that it was trying to solve. Like the fact that it was all fad and flashed and stuff. It's yeah, that I've seen this hype cycle before. Over and over and over again in my career, I've seen this hype cycle before, and I called it. Like it's if I can't immediately explain to you where the actual use is in a regular human's life, yeah, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
But the moment that I actually can see that actual regular humans can use this in an everyday context, and it actually gets adopted, then I know we're on to something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really early, and it's like the wild west. I'm interested in you talk about the impact of because you referenced the big tech and mafia, the big tech and ethics and their effect on small technology companies.
Yeah, one of my thoughts on this is technology broadly gets a bum rap because of a small number of actors. So and I'm gonna pick on, like, it's easy to pick on like big tech, right? Like I could pick on Amazon or Google or I could pick on Meta. Like, they're really easy to pick on because they get all the headlines. But when we actually break down the bulk of where technology work is done, it's not done in these four companies. As I talked about, like for every dollar in Microsoft revenue, there's $8 that are associated with the partner companies that work with them. That means it's 8 times bigger everybody that works with Microsoft, not Microsoft themselves. And by the way, they're almost the bigger ones. When we talk about Google, that number is a little smaller. It's about $6. And so those are the spaces that are way bigger in terms of what's actually happening in technology than the people that get headlines. We've come through this bit where we actually talk about all of the, for example, the layoffs, right? You hear if you open the paper last month, all you would hear about was all the tech layoffs. Well, they kind of just rewound to where they were last summer. If you measure them over the past 2 to 3 years, they all grew. They all grew a lot by head count, like a lot. And from a percentage perspective, they only let go, a smaller percentage. Now, I want to acknowledge that for those individual humans, that's a life-changing moment, and that is an important thing to do. But you know what also happens? We know statistically that most of those people have new and higher paying jobs within 3 months. So let's not cry for the technology sector, but to these big companies. Let's actually focus on where most of the work is actually being done.
That's quite interesting because you have a lot of experience and knowledge. And one thing that's been getting headlines is return to work, and some companies are forcing employees to come. What's really happening to this work?
Bad managers only know how to manage one way, and they're trying to force everybody into the office. I mean, it's kind of that simple, because you can sort of see it. And by the way, they tend to be, rich old white guys, because they've been doing it one way a very long time. They probably live in a very, very comfortable situation where they don't have to think about childcare, or they don't have to think about family, like other family members. They don't have any instability in their lives. And funny, it's really easy for them to want to just immediately go back to the one thing that they've been doing for, 50 years. But anybody who actually thinks about managing people understands that the core elements of managing people have less to do with their physical location and more the way you engage them as a human being. Managing people effectively is a talent. And you learn slightly different versions of those skills when you manage people remotely versus managing them on premise, because it does take a little bit more to read emotions, for example, and to have those interactions. But you can still do it. It just takes some concentrated effort. And you have to be, in particular, you have to manage much more by results than you manage by time. Well, managing by time, really easy to do, right? I just count the number of hours you're in the office and I can loosely get a sense of how productive you are. Managing based on output, that's a harder thing and it requires some process and investment, and there's some resistance to that. It's funny how all of these mandates are actually landing more in a middle ground of let's find what works for people and make them effective at what they do. But it makes for a really bad headline. So for me, that what I spend a lot of time talking to my listeners and to those that I work with is you want to spend some time figuring out the best way to manage your people that's most effective for your goals. You'll use the technology tools to enable that. There are times, I'm a big believer, that you want to get people together physically. There are also kinds of work that's done best remote, and there's other times where it kind of depends. And you want to build an organization that can be flexible to that and utilize the tools in the right way.
Yeah. And I know we're coming to kind of the end, and tell us more, just, kind of your thoughts on diversity, equity, inclusion in tech.
Yeah, we're kind of bad at it. It's this is traditionally a space that is overwhelmingly white and male. And I look at it kind of from two perspectives. The first thing is I'm kind of a capitalist. Like, I like making money and I like building businesses that are effective. And one of the things that I focus a lot about is the idea of understanding my customers. In order to understand my customers, I need to listen, but I also need the ability to understand their experience. Having a more diverse workforce and more different kinds of voices enabling that means I can communicate as an organization to more kinds of customers and I can relate them. From my perspective, all the data and the obvious logic to it makes sense of, if you want to have the broadest possible customer base, having a diverse workforce is good for you. And additionally, it's proven out in the data. You can acquire more customers, you get more diverse ideas, you outperform. And then the second bit is it's kind of the right thing to do. Treating people fairly, equitably, it's the right thing to do. It feels good, builds good organizations. And it's nice when those two things can come together. And so I think an investment in deliberately trying to do that and understanding where you stand is worth doing. And I tend to think it comes from the top. I think it comes from management buy-in. So one of the things I do on my show is we actually track diversity at the leadership teams in IT organizations to try and measure how many organizations are really investing in this idea to drive that diversity into their org.
Yeah. Fascinating discussion, really, talking about tech and everything from current state to regulation, technology, ethics. So how can people contact you, follow you, reach out to you, and check out your podcast?
I am easy to find. All the links are at businessof.tech. There's a big blue button to subscribe. You can get, if you like audio podcasts, it's a daily 5-minute show where we dive into that. On YouTube, shows come out twice a week. You can get the daily digest in your inbox or the weekly newsletter, depending on how you like to consume it. And of course, all the social links to get in touch with me right there on the website. Again, that's Business Of.
Yeah. And for all the listeners out there, let's thank Dave for coming onto the show, dropping nuggets of wisdom and experience. He's on Facebook, YouTube, Insta, Twitter, as well as the Business of Tech, as he mentioned. And all of the resources will be in the links and show notes. And thanks so much for coming onto the podcast. It was a pleasure.
Oh, thanks for having me. This has been a great discussion.
I hope you really enjoyed that wonderful, inspirational, motivational piece. Again, wherever you are listening, if you liked it, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. We're on everywhere: Spotify, iTunes, Google, Amazon, Audible. And without much ado, be sure to thank this show's sponsors, and we'll see you next week.